This conference will now be recorded.
All right, thank you, Scott. As Scott mentioned, I'm from the Sioux Locks. I'm the Chief Park Ranger at the Sioux Locks Visitor Center. I've been there for going on, or actually over 15 years. So I've learned a few things here and there. Um, One of the things I do want to just offer a disclaimer. This program was put together. We had some schedule snafus, and it was put together in about 2 days. Um, and if you were planning to tune in and spend your lunch hour with me learning about building a lock, I don't want to disappoint you, but I'm a historian and not an engineer. And the hour you spend here with me is probably not going to enable you to start building a lock in your backyard. But what I was trying to do is I've worked with a lot of our historic images. I've been studying and absorbing the Sioux locks for the last 15 years, or probably even longer, to be honest. And I just wanted to kind of take a look at the big steps involved in building a lock and how that has changed and stayed the same from the time the first lock was built here in 1855. So um, let's get going. So I'm going to first start out with some questions that we get all the time in the visitor center. Why do you even need to build a lock? This is not the Sioux, obviously. If anyone has been there, you may recognize this is Niagara Falls, the biggest waterfall on the Great Lakes. Um, if you were operating your boat, paddling a canoe, if you were a voyageur in the 16th, 17th century, you're going to hear this from a long way away. When you get to it, you're going to realize that you are not going to be able to go up that. Your journey in the water has stopped for a while. This waterfall occurs where Lake Erie is flowing north into Lake Ontario. There's a 326-foot or so elevation change there, which creates Niagara Falls. Now, in Sault Ste. Marie, we don't have a Niagara Falls, but we are connecting two major Great Lakes, Lake Superior and Lake Huron, two of the biggest of the Great Lakes. And there's an elevation change there. And in the Sioux, you're not going to come upon a wall of water. You're going to come upon what they used to call the St. Mary's Falls, which is probably more technically we would understand as a rapids. Now, this one doesn't look that terrible. It kind of looks like if it was a hot day, maybe that'd be fun to kind of inner tube down. But if you're operating a cargo vessel or even a trade canoe, you are not going to be able to navigate this. This was taken just a couple years ago when we had quite a bit of water. The picture I'm going to show you next is the time we had kind of record low water levels, and you can see what's creating that whitewater. It is bedrock underneath. So whether the water is high or low, you are not going to be able to take a boat through here. And that has been true since the Native Americans were coming here thousands of years ago. And it's still true today. The other question we get all the time at the visitor center that I like to try to head off is if you let it flow, won't the rapids just disappear? Because we all learn about erosion when we're in school, and it's going to wear away, and eventually it'll all be the same level because water seeks itself and levels itself. That's how we got a Grand Canyon, right? We all understand that. Well, it takes a while though. So Niagara Falls is 12,000 years old. It is eroding. It is making its way to Lake Erie. This graphic you can see on the screen, you can see over here where the face of the fall was. This is Horseshoe Falls on the Canadian side, where it was in 1678 when Europeans documented it. And you can see where it was in 2011. It's moved a couple hundred feet. And at this current rate, right now, they estimate it moves about a foot a year, moving northward ever steadily towards Lake Erie. And it will eventually level out in about 50,000 years, is what they've calculated. Which will eventually turn Lake Erie into a river, which is kind of exciting. I wonder if that means we have to, it's no longer a lake, it's a river like we had to do with Pluto a long time ago with planets. But anyway, that 50,000 year timeline is not going to work for transporting cargoes and vessels. Again, we don't have the same volume of water, and it's a much shorter drop, but we have the same kind of problem here. That bedrock that you saw on the earlier slide underneath that water is sandstone, but it's an iron impregnated sandstone. It's called the Jacobsville Formation. It is the same formation of rock that you see if you go to Munising to Pictured Rocks to visit there. And It is a very, very strong sandstone. We use it as building materials. They did in Sault Ste. Marie in the 19th century, made some beautiful buildings out of it, but it erodes very, very slowly. I just want to real quick, this is kind of mind-blowing when people aren't familiar with it. Look at these elevations that we have. Oops, I hit a wrong button there. Right up here in Lake Superior, we are 602 feet above sea level. Lake Huron is roughly about 23, 24 feet lower in elevation. So basically what you're seeing here is all of the Great Lakes. They put Huron and Michigan together because hydrologically they're one lake. And this is how the water is all flowing out to the ocean. So that water we saw earlier pouring over Niagara Falls, a lot of it started right up here in Lake Superior. That is the only outlet for Lake Superior water, is to go out through the Lake Huron, Lake Erie, and Lake Ontario, and then out to the Atlantic Ocean. All this water is, of course, flowing downhill. And of course, it replenishes all the time, I should mention, because you're like, well, wouldn't it empty out? It would, except for, we're in the upper Midwest and we get a lot of snow, get a lot of rain, we get the lakes freeze over and stop evaporating. We have a pretty strong water supply for a while. So as you saw in that previous slide, we're going to have to go around that obstruction, that waterfall. In the 17th and 18th centuries, this meant doing something that they called a portage, a French word, and in the English we just say portage. You may recognize Portage Avenue, where the Soo Locks are. That was actually a path like the one the voyageurs in this photo are using to carry their loads. Those voyageurs I described, when they were working on paddling and they hear that rapids and they realize that they're going to have to go around the rapids, well, that means you're going to have to unload up to 5 tons of trade goods out of your canoe. They're going to carry it in 2 45-pound packs on their backs for as long as it takes to get around that obstruction. In Sault Ste. Marie, that was probably about a mile to get around the rapids where you could safely launch and load and unload your canoe. It's going to be a long, miserable day. We have a lot of mosquitoes here in the summer. It's just not going to be a good time. So that's how we did that in the 19th and 17th century, or sorry, 18th and 17th centuries. In the 19th century, it's kind of the same process, except the only difference is we're not really dealing with voyageurs. We're dealing with a much larger scale now. And it's similar practice. The only difference is you don't have a canoe to carry around anymore. So what we had in Sault Ste. Marie is docks above and below the locks. And then a ship would come out of Lake Superior loaded with its cargoes, and it would be unloaded at that dock. It'd take about a week to unload that cargo. That cargo would go into a warehouse where it could be inventoried and keep those controls on it so it doesn't show up in somebody's carriage house or barn. And then it would be transferred down Portage Avenue on this little strap railway. You can see there's livestock pulling the cars that would be loaded with cargoes going between those two warehouses to be put on boats going the other direction. So a downbound boat is going to come and they're going to dock above the locks and they're going to be unloaded, and then they're going to be loaded with goods going into Lake Superior. And then of course the reverse is true at the lower end for things going to the lower lakes. The only exception, I did say we didn't move the boat. We don't move the canoes. The only exception is all the boats on Lake Superior took a one-time, one-way trip up Portage Avenue. This is a picture from the very first steamship and the first ship that became part of that Lake Superior fleet. In total, there were 11 of them. It took 7 weeks to move this empty vessel in 1845. It was built in Chicago, came up to the base of the rapids. They had a special cradle, hauled it out, had to drag it, push it, pull it up Portage Avenue to launch it above the rapids. And it was a one-way trip. I want to emphasize that. I've heard lots of locals who mislearned their Michigan history when they were kids, who thought loaded ships were moved this way. That just doesn't make financial sense. The more you handle a cargo, the longer it takes, the more it costs. And you wouldn't want to spend 7 weeks moving a cargo if you could spend a week or 2 weeks moving a cargo. It was a pretty big business in Sault Ste. Marie, managed everything fine, but things started to change in the 1840s. Now, as early as 1621, Europeans had documented copper on the western shores of Lake Superior on the western Upper Peninsula. And of course, natives always knew, but we always say the Europeans discovered it. In 1820, Lewis Cass, who eventually became one of Michigan's early governors, found the Ontonagon boulder near Ontonagon, Michigan. It's one of the largest pieces of native float copper that has ever been recovered. I think it might be in the Smithsonian. And then in 1840, the gentleman you see in that upper right corner with his furry little companion um, made a trip through the Keweenaw and along the shores of Lake Superior and published a report that documented the iron ore and copper that was available up there. By 1844, commercial mining was active on the shores of Lake Superior. I should also mention in 1844, the rest of America is kind of going through this huge industrial boom time, especially on the the lower Great Lakes and the upper Midwest. It's a huge time. People are coming in. We need all those materials. And there's a demand for those cargoes that are available on Lake Superior. We need an efficient way to get them to the mills on the lower lakes. Now, the locals, they had a pretty good deal. There were a couple hundred people living in the Soo, and an awful lot of people made their living unloading all those boats and reloading them. Clerks tracking those inventories, teamsters taking care of the livestock and all the loading and unloading. This is big industry. At this time, every ship is spending about 2 weeks at the dock. So there was a whole other little support industry of laundry services and restaurants and grog shops to entertain and care for all of those waiting sailors. So moving cargoes and the delays in shipping are actually a really important part of Sault Ste. Marie's early economy. But there's a problem now that we need all that copper and iron ore from the western shores of Lake Superior, and we need a lot of it. They just can't keep up with the cargoes that are in motion. So every winter near the end of the 1840s, we're having just tons and tons of cargoes sitting in warehouses because they just ran out of time and couldn't get them loaded. The locals, of course, don't want a lock built. They've got a perfectly good thing going. They had some support within the U.S. Congress, too, for years. This is Senator Henry Clay. He was a senator from Kentucky and did not feel like spending this kind of resources in such a remote part of America would be in the national interest. I kind of take issue with the remote as the moon, although maybe in the 1840s it was just about as remote. Luckily, the situation changed, and by 1852, we had federal support for building a lock. Of course, that's probably helped by the need for those cargoes that are sitting every winter in Sault Ste. Marie just because the shipping season is so short and it is so time consuming. And of course, if you're a person buying that cargo, same as now, every time you handle a piece of cargo, its cost is going to go up. And the longer it takes to deliver that cargo, again, cost is going to go up. So if you're operating a mill, you're going to want those cargoes delivered as efficiently and quickly as possible. Now, when the Congress approved it, they gave this, I should clarify too, this was a state of Michigan project. So the state of Michigan went to the federal government, justified why they felt that this project was in the national interest and should get federal support. It took a long time, but they eventually got that approval. And the Congress awarded them 10 years to get the lock built. So once the contract was awarded, the federal government said to get our support and the payment, you're going to have to get the lock built within 10 years. Okay. Now, talking about that needing to get permission again, I just put this little table up showing, because sometimes this approval process happens really fast and sometimes it takes a little while. So you can see there, like that state lock, that authorization is actually a second authorization. There was an earlier authorization in the 1830s, but that's a whole nother story what happened to that one. Not enough time for it in this presentation. Our longest delay for a lock, you may note, is that one at the very bottom, the new lock at the Soo. It was like an almost 50-year wait from its approval to its construction. One of the reasons you're going to need, you have that delay, is you're going to need the money. Having a lock approved or authorized is not the same thing as if it's paid for. It's like if your spouse came to you and wanted a Lamborghini and you said, yeah, I think you should have a Lamborghini, but you don't go to the bank, you don't fill out any paperwork, you don't write a check, you don't get any money out of the bank. You just say, yeah, I think that'd be a great idea. So paid for is a very different thing. Um, so this lock is kind of different because the federal government supported it, but it was a state of Michigan project, so its funding is very weird, and I'm going to get to how they funded that first state lock. Oh, sorry, I'm losing track of my spot. Sorry. So the first lock built by the state of Michigan, it wasn't paid for with money. So the Congress didn't approve it and say, okay, we're going to give you X dollars that you can use to build this lock. What they did is they gave the state of Michigan 750,000 acres of federal lands that were available in Michigan, undeveloped lands that were in federal possession. Those were given to the state of Michigan to use to underwrite the cost of building this lock. Now, every lock we've built here since then, since that very first state lock, has been a federal project. And so, for the most part, all that money is coming from the federal government because it is a federal facility and operates in the national interest for national security and the economy. Um, and I will say one kind of neat thing, which I think is kind of a neat connection to the past with the funding for this current lock that we're building now, is of course the bulk of the money, the overwhelming majority of the money is coming from the federal government. But on this project, the state of Michigan chipped in too. I think it was 2020 or 2019, the state of Michigan designated $52 million for this federal project. That was very helpful because it was provided some kind of startup money and some kind of gap funding in those early years when we were just getting started. And I will also mention our projects aren't funded by here's your land and you can sell it, but they are funded year to year. So you see those different FY price tags there. The way the federal government does most of its financing is you get what you can spend that year. So we go with our budget request and we spell out the tasks we're going to complete, how much they're going to cost, and how confident we are we can complete those, so that we try to spend all the money we have every year. We don't carry it over. And that's just how we manage it. They call it efficient funding. So it just means a year to year steady input based on what we can accomplish and fund. So now you've got your money, we're going to need a contractor. Building a lock is a huge project, and it's not something that just your down the street neighbor with his private construction company is going to be able to take on. It's a huge project. And I want to also, back to that first lock, which you're seeing a plan for on your screen right now. It was a messy, messy situation. I'm not even going to get into it because it's so complicated that there's no time for it. But I'll just say that in 1850s in Michigan, politics were extremely messy. Within the state government who is doing this project, who is basically the contractor, the overcontractor or whatever, project manager for this project, there were people who were all for building a lock, thought it was a great idea, and they were all behind it. There were other people in government who thought it was a terrible idea and were opposed to it and wanted to do anything they could to stop it. And there was a whole nother like second, third tier of people, politicians who had connections to people who had companies who wanted to get the project. So there was a lot of, let's just say, nasty politics. And also, I think probably because of this politics, remember the federal government said they had 10 years to build it. The state wrote the contract, they only had 2 years to build a lock where there had been nothing and where railroads don't even go. And you can reach it by boat for maybe 7 to 8 months a year. They get 2 years, start to finish. And of course, that was part of, I think there were a lot of people who wanted them to fail. In one of the books I was reading a few years ago, researching this topic, the governor at the time was very in favor of the lock. He was politically connected to people involved in the board that you see there. That board, by the way, is made up of a lot of wealthy industrialists at that time. Don't recognize all the names, but you may recognize a few. These are the extremely elite, wealthy people of America at that time. And then I also wanted to mention the Attorney General of Michigan. He did not like that this company got the contract, and he spent almost 2 years just suing them like just constantly. There were all these lawsuits. Most of them didn't come to anything, but it ate up a lot of time and resources and made it difficult to finish this project in 2 years. Now, and back to the funding. Uh, the company is also not going to be paid in money. Just like the state of Michigan is just being the trustee of these 750,000 acres of land. And when this company finishes that lock in their 2 years, and if the inspectors within the state determine that some part of that contract has not been fulfilled to their satisfaction, the company won't get anything. They get zero. Michigan will keep all that land, and the company built that lock for nothing. And I should mention too, I mentioned that the board members there are really wealthy people. This is because they had to lay out all the money for the project. In 1855, the cost was about $1 million in 1855 dollars, and they had to lay all that money out up front. It's a huge gamble. If they had failed to meet that deadline by even a week or two, or if some part of it was not fulfilled to the state of Michigan's satisfaction, they would have spent that $1 million and they would have walked away with absolutely nothing. Luckily, they did manage to pull it off. It was kind of a miracle, and they got their 750,000 acres of land when they spent about 10 years selling that off to see their profit, which I understand they made a very healthy profit. It's a little less dramatic now since we're in the federal system. Every system has its issues, but we have bidding processes and all kinds of things to try to level that playing field. Everybody gets a chance. And what you're seeing here on the screen right there is one of our industry days. I don't know why they're called that, but it's when we're doing a major project like that, we'll do industry days where the contractors and potential subcontractors are invited on site. They are provided with the scope of work, that detailed scope that is specifying all the terms of what they have to accomplish and when and timelines and all of that. And then they have an opportunity to walk the site. They get a chance to see exactly what they're in for, what the terrain looks like, to ask all their questions. And I think that makes it a lot fairer. And of course, I think it helps the contractors to make a reasonable and realistic quote. And it helps us as the Corps of Engineers as well, because then we're not constantly having to do modifications or running into situations where there's no money for that and you didn't anticipate this, and now we're kind of at an impasse. I will mention that if there had been industry days for that first lock, it might have been a much smoother process. They really had no idea what they were in for when they started that project. Another thing that we do now too, it's not all a one and done like it was for that state lock. It was just one big, huge project. For the new lock at the Soo, it's broken up into 3 phases. Phase 1 was doing the approach canals, and I'm going to apologize. I could not find a logo for Trade West. That is the company that won the bid for that. The first part of this project was work deepening our approach canals. Trade West is out of Nevada. That surprised everybody, but I will say from what I noticed, I think they used a lot of local subcontractors. For the second phase, that was working on just the approach walls. This was a huge project, and it was bigger than what one company could take on. So they formed a partnership or a joint venture, Kokosing and Alberici, to work on those approach walls. Phase 3, that is the biggest part. That's building that chamber, doing that demolition and excavation and all of that, and installing all the machinery. That one, it took 3 companies. So we had Kokosing and Alberici, who had that phase 2 part, and then Trailer joined in as well. And another nice thing is, unlike that first lock, they don't have to lay out all the money and get paid at the end with this huge lump sum. The contracts are set up with very specific targets and benchmarks, and as the contractor meets those benchmarks and targets, they get their payments. And those industry days, I think, probably help with that as well, because they get a chance to kind of reality check those timelines in the contract. So you've got a plan, you've got a contractor, you've got the money. You're going to need to test the plan. You don't want to go and spend $1 million and then find out that there was some design flaw and your lock doesn't work. Now, I can tell you with pretty high confidence they did not do that for the first lock. They seem to, I've done a lot of research on this, they seem to be flying by the seat of their pants a lot. They thought that the ground under the surface and under the water was going to be like just earth and sand, and they found out it's bedrock. It's almost entirely bedrock. They hadn't anticipated that. They also expected it to be like the weather in central and southern New York, where they could work for year round or at least 11 to 10 months a year. Of course, it's Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, and the Upper Peninsula, Michigan, and that is not our season. But there they go. They managed it. For the original Poe lock, built in 1896, and the Davis and Sabin locks, they made scale models. So they had their plan, they had all their drawings, and they went ahead and they built it. They made these models out of wood. Um, we still have these models, by the way. I'm very proud of these models. The one you see in the upper right corner, it's a picture from March 1893, and the craftsmen are there posed with it. On the right side of that image, you see the Wetzel lock, the lock built here in 1881. On the the right side of that image, you see what was the original Poe lock, which opened in 1896. So they build these models, test the design. The one you see in the lower left corner, that is a model of the Davis and Sabin. Those two locks were twins. They were built from the exact same plan, so we only had to make one model. And I mentioned I'm very proud of these models. And these models are in our park. You'll be able to see them if you come see us this summer at the Soo Locks. They're in great big cases. We're hoping to have some interpretive exhibits installed with them this summer as well. And you can actually see these models, which are really treasured artifacts for us at the Soo. For the new lock, they did not have to make wooden models. We have some new technology. So they have these 3D renderings, which I think we're all used to seeing now. Another neat thing they did with that new lock is they did some virtual reality stuff. So the picture on the lower left, that is a former commander of ours on the third floor of our administration building. You can see him wearing that virtual reality headset, and he's got some controls in his hands. He's standing there in the third floor of our building in a meeting room, and in that headset, he's walking the lock. And I was describing to me that this was really helpful for a lot of people to kind of check how the things are coming together in the plan. In the upper right, that is our chief of operations here at Sault Ste. Marie, and he is at the Engineering Research and Development Center down south for the Corps of Engineers. And they had this simulation that he went through. A whole bunch of our people and engineers and operators and et cetera went and used it. And this was actually really helpful even before we started construction. They realized some tweaks that had to be made and that they had to take the approach further west and some other things that this virtual reality helped us solve that problem before we were in the field having to solve that problem. This is my favorite piece. I put this last. You'll see there in that photo too some of your hopefully favorite Soo Locks park rangers in their camouflage civilian clothes. We do tours of the new lock twice a year so that we can intelligently answer questions about it. The gentleman in that picture who is handling that model is the project manager for CAT, the contractor, and he is showing us this model, and it is really cool. I have my hands in my pockets because I am resisting the temptation to start playing with it. It all comes apart, and every single piece is numbered and labeled where it goes. And so he's taken some of those sections out you can see in the photo, and they can strip that all the way down to like where they are at this moment or what they're going to be doing next. And of course, it's all synced up with that drawing above, so that it's a really cool way to illustrate what's happening, what's going to happen next. And I don't know that we would have a use for it in our visitor center, but boy, I sure would like to have that when the project's done. So your plan is fine. Now you're getting ready to get started. You're going to need some dams. This is a drawing from that first lock built in 1855. And they had a pretty easy time with this lock because they built it on what was then the mainland, which is this block was built where the current Poe lock is, so it's no longer mainland, but at that time it was. So there's not a lot of water that they're going to have to deal with. Oops, my mouse is doing funny things. There we go. But if we look over here, I just wanted to point out this lock was kind of unique. It was a tandem lock. It was one chamber after another. Each chamber lifted a ship about 9, 10 feet. And you would go into one, be lowered, and go into the next, be lowered to the next level or raised. And it's mostly they're going to be on dry land working, but you're going to need a dam over here. You're going to need a dam over here, and you're going to need a dam over at this far end where the river meets the shoreline, because you got to have workspaces. We don't have any pictures of that dam, by the way. 1855, there were no photographers here other than people building the lock. There were barely people here. This picture is one of our very earliest construction photos from the original Poe. What you're seeing right up here at the end is a cofferdam that was installed there to keep the water out so that they could start the demolition of that state lock. The MacArthur lock they used, built in 1943, opened in 43. They used coffer cells, so you see these round cells being all just attached one after another, and that's going to create a dam. When it connects to this nose pier, they're going to use pumps. They'll pump that all out, and you have a dry workspace. They did basically the same thing to do the Poe. So the Poe lock, you see a pretty, this is the original Poe, what used to be the original Poe, the 1896 lock, which is now the current Poe lock from 1968. This was taken during 1963 when they had to flood the worksite to redesign the lock, but that's a whole different presentation. And we're doing pretty much the same process with the new lock at the Soo. So this is an aerial view from, I think, last winter. You see those coffer cells. This is 2023, probably December. You can see those coffer cells, those round cells built up next to each other right there underneath this scaffolding structure that they were using to keep it warm because they had to do some grout installation and things like that. But there you go. You see they've made this, instead of blocking off a huge area, they've just put that dam in front of those approach canals so that they have dry space to work in for that demolition. You're going to need approach canals. We mostly talk about the locks, but the approach canals are just as important. And I'm just going to point out here we have the south lower approach. So this is on the south part of the river, and that's the approach to the MacArthur and the Poe locks. Over here we have the lower approach for what was the Davis and Sabin locks and will be the new lock at the Soo. Here we have our upper approaches. Now these two approaches, when they were improved, for the Poe lock, and I think maybe for the MacArthur lock, were brought down to the project depth of 30 feet. We keep the canals at 30 feet. The lock chambers are 31 and 32 for the Poe. And over here, these Davis approaches, when they were built 24 feet deep, and the lock chambers were 22 feet deep. For that first state lock, the approaches are pretty basic, but they had to do a lot of dredging, and you got to clear all the debris because you have to have it at the appropriate depth. You can see here all the rock and the overburden and where the water is. And you're going to have to make sure that your approaches are uniformly deep enough and wide enough for your ships to safely get in and out of your lock. Now, the way they did this for that first lock in 1855, they used what we now call Harvey's hammer. And this was a steam-powered spile driver, it's called. Kind of old name for a piece of equipment. This is an artist drawing, obviously. There's Harvey's hammer. They manufactured this out of basically junk and spare parts over winter when there was no way to get any materials in, and they had found a shelf of rock they could not break with ordinary means. If you've been to the visitor center, you can actually see and touch Harvey's hammer. It's one of our kind of cool artifacts from the past. Now, I should have mentioned, sometimes you work in the dry, sometimes you work in the wet. For Harvey's hammer and the first lock, they were doing that in the wet. Here on the Sabin lock in the, 1918, they're working on that lower approach, and you see the dredge right here, and they've got a barge to take those spoils away. And they're working in the wet. So you can't see the bottom, but they're going to use a survey sweep vessel to make sure that the depth is uniform. Back then it was a barge with poles, but we have more technology now. In the MacArthur lock construction, 1940s, they did it in the dry. This is a picture from 1943. I think it was April. One neat thing to note in there is one of those anti-aircraft barrage balloons. We had a battalion of those up here, and that was meant to keep anybody from dive bombing the locks during World War II. And here you see they pumped out that area that was defined by those cofferdams earlier, and they're working in the dry. You can see if you've missed a spot, you can get it all level. But there's a lot of time and expense in that cofferdam process, and of course in the pumping. And you have to keep pumping because cofferdams are not 100% watertight. Uh, for the new lock at the Soo, they're doing this with in the wet. They did it, I should say. It's already completed. They had to take that canal down 6 additional feet to 30 feet from its original 24. The canal is about a mile long. I've lost track of the width of it, but it's going to be a big wide approach because we've got to get 1,000-footers in and out of there. And in total, Tradewest removed 300,000 cubic yards of material to deepen the approach. Most of that material was rock. There was some mud and overburden, but mostly it is bedrock. And one of the tools they used here, I want to compare in my next slide. This is a ripper, basically a ginormous jackhammer. They bring it down to the bottom and they break up the rock, they fracture it so an excavator can come and pick it up, which is essentially what Harvey's hammer did. Whereas Harvey's hammer was on a steam-powered barge and tied to the shoreline so it could work a grid. The new ones are just on barges, diesel power and hydraulics. So exact same process, just different tools and technology. So now that we've got our approaches taken care of, we're gonna have to dig a really big hole, like a really big hole. This is a picture showing almost that transition between excavation and construction. So to dig that hole, usually going to involve some explosives. This is kind of a cool shot. Just thinking about the camera equipment you have in 1913, it's not like even what my cell phone can do or my really nice Canon can do. They caught the first explosion. So that was the first blast they set off in 1913 for the Sabin lock. This is one of my favorite MacArthur lock pictures, just because it's so improbable now. You can see they've just set off the blast, and there's a ship in the lock. Now that ship is probably in the Davis lock, but it's still within just a few hundred yards of where that blast went off. But there's a war on, and we got to keep those cargoes moving, and we got to build this new lock. My next slide here, I have a 15-second video. I want to just warn you that it may not play smoothly depending on what your internet is like where you are, but I will assure you that it will be very smooth. It should be smooth in the recording. So if you really want to go back and see it not wonky, I would recommend check out the recording of this. That'll be on YouTube probably early next week. So I'm going to start this, and if I can find the start button here. I don't know why it's not working. Well, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to ruin the surprise that I was trying to pull together here. It's not that exciting. It's just a little poof of pinkish brown dirt over here. And I think this video is probably on our Facebook page somewhere. I'm trying to see if I can get it to play. I cannot get it to play. Oh, there it goes. So watch over here. There you go. There was a blast. And I will, just to contrast that blast we saw in the MacArthur lock with a ship in the lock, we are so much more safety minded now. We just posted this to our Facebook page, I think a week or two ago, and you can see all our like standoff areas. We've got the spawning areas noted because we don't want to interfere with the fish. We have these, different, 1,000-foot and wider. A ship will not be allowed to be in these areas while we are doing a blast. And if I remember correctly, we're going to be starting to blast end of this week, maybe tomorrow, and then they're expecting a couple blasts a week as they start deepening that hole that they're building for that new lock at the Sioux. And the little blue thing covered in snow that you see over on the left side, just another piece of that safety equipment that I don't think they were really using during the MacArthur lock construction or that Sabin lock construction. It's like a seismograph machine, solar powered. It's covered in snow because my boss went out and got a picture of it for me today. So I realized sometime around 1:30 in the morning last night that I wanted one for here. There's also one of these over by the observation platform. If you visit us in the park, you'll see that because every time the blast goes off, they're wanting to see what's happening in the wider area to mitigate any kind of damage that could be happening or any risks to people. So once you've set off all your blasts, you got to start clearing all that material out. This was a miserable day of work, I think, for these fellows out there in 1908. You can see all the snow, has to be cold. You can see these wagons they're filling up. There's a horse over here waiting to start hauling them away. I think there might be another horse over here. So a lot of manpower and horsepower at the very beginning. Luckily, they eventually did bring in the big steam powered equipment. So you got some steam powered excavators in there now starting to work away. Now, one thing I'll point out, it's a black and white picture. And so we just see black and white. But other than like these gray areas you see, everything here would be that beautiful reddish brown stone. For the Pollock construction, we have more modern equipment. We've got a fleet of dump trucks to haul everything away as opposed to little wagons drawn by horses. We've got some loaders here and see the fuel trucks on standby. Definitely change that process. And then this is a picture from this summer, early summer, from the new Lock at the Sioux project. And what you can see they're using there are called hoe rams. You see it's on a tracked vehicle. So those can go anywhere they need to go. You don't need those railroad tracks. And those hoe rams, if you came to the Sioux, you probably heard them last summer. It's like a tap, 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 tap. It's just like the background noise. They probably hear it about 22 hours a day. It stops for shift changes and lunch breaks and stuff. And I was talking to one of these operators last summer. And I was just kind of curious because it seems horrible. And he was telling us he gets a $2,000 a month bonus on top of his regular pay for doing that job. Your body is going to be vibrating all the time from that banging and the machinery. I found out, I thought you'd have to wear like hearing protection. This is actually not allowed to wear hearing protection because you have to listen to the sound that the tapping is making so that you can identify any kind of problems before they become a crisis. And he says you can listen to a radio in the cab, but I was talking to him, I said, so do you hear that noise like all the time? And he said, I hear it in my sleep. So he probably deserves that $2,000 a month bonus. And here's a little more recent. The gray that you see are the remains of the Sabin lock monolith, that concrete that they are clearing away. The red you're starting to see over here, we're starting to get down to those bedrock layers that the lock was built on. And that beautiful red stone. Now I'm just going to go back to this picture, take a look at this, all those beautiful red colors and how bright that is. That's what this looked like too. It's just that we had black and white photography. Now that you got your hole built, we're going to have to build some infrastructure. Kind of sounds silly because a navigation lock is infrastructure. It's big infrastructure. But we're going to have ways to move machines and equipment and materials around within that work site. Here in the Davis lock, it's probably around 1909 or so, 1910. I've lost track of the year. They're building some trestles here. They're just in like the early phases of building that. On the, I should also, they also had to lay down a lot of railroad track because we're using things that are just, they're being moved around on rail. You saw in that earlier picture, even just the wagons to haul off the debris are going on rails. So we're actually building railroads for the construction of the original Pollock, the Davis, and the Sabin. Just like miles of railroad track. In more recent locks, we just build roads because we have trucks and we have tracked equipment. So we can get anywhere we need to go without needing the rails. But here you see on the current Poe lock from the 60s, one of the roads and ramps that they're building and one that they're working on just to move equipment around. And here's a picture of the new lock at the Soo. And I can tell you that this roadway here is pretty much a super highway. If you come see us in the Soo, you'll see those trucks back and forth constantly. It's like a parade. There's cement trucks and dump trucks. So full cement trucks often go in one way, and then empty dump trucks go in the other way. Because fortunately for the new lock at the Soo, their disposal area is on the same island they're on. You're going to need some docks too. Figure that a dock needs a lock. So right over here, they've got a mooring spot set up. Most of these bulk materials, the fastest and easiest and most efficient way to bring them in is by ship. So you want a place for them to be able to tie up and discharge their cargo as close to where you want it. You also have to, on the Poe, current Poe from the 60s, you had to build little weird things like this little cantilever platform that dump truck driver has to back up on so that he can dump the debris into a barge that will then take it to its disposal area, which is the Northwest Pier at the Soo Locks. I have to confess, I don't like driving in reverse at all. I never back into my garage. I don't think that I would have the courage to back up a loaded dump truck onto that little platform over the water. Kudos to him. He deserves his money. I don't have a lot of pictures of the docks at the new lock construction project, but I have this picture from the lower end, and you can see pretty substantial little fleet, barges and tugs and everything else. Thing to emphasize just again, the new lock construction area is an island. It has two operating navigation locks to its south. To its north, it has two hydropower head races and a tail race. And then it has, of course, the rapids further to the north. So everything, all this equipment you see in there, that all had to come by boat. The people operating that equipment and all of the workers on the site also come and go by boat. They're anticipating up to 600 people a day working on that new lock. And with the two operating locks, there's no way to move that volume of people back and forth efficiently, smoothly. You would have people stuck waiting, half hour or more just to get across the lock to get to the work site. So they're all brought in and out by boat. So there are a contract. They have a contract with one of the tour boat companies, and all employees come and go on a ship every single day. So I tell you, it's well paid. That guy gets that $2,000 bonus, but you sure don't want to forget your lunch at home. We're going to need some bedrock cores. This was a thing I didn't know until I started to work here. You have to get core samples of the bedrock that you're going to put that lock on. A lock is extremely heavy, tons and tons and tons of concrete, like trillions of pounds. We're talking about that's going to be sitting on the bedrock, and it has to be stable. You need stable bedrock. So what you see here from, I think it's 1907, is two fellows out there with their equipment, and they are doing their borings and getting their core samples. You see that they are all boxed up in these wooden boxes, being very carefully curated. Well, and we still have these, I should mention. It's been over 100 years old. We still have these bedrock cores because this is important information we need to document and know just in case. And we're still doing that. The equipment has changed, probably a little more efficient and faster. But you see here, again, the park rangers on their tour. Hopefully some of your favorite park rangers are in that photo. Someone from the new lock project is showing us these core samples, and they're all labeled. You see they've got all the notations, what run it is, where it was from, everything else. And if you look behind us all, you'll see shelves of them. This is a climate controlled laboratory, essentially. One half is where all these core samples are. The other half is a concrete laboratory. Lots of testing happens. And these samples will be kept forever as well, just like we have kept all the core samples from the other lock projects that we've built. So we know that our bedrock is good, our plan is good, we have the money, we have our contractor, we've dug the hole, now we finally get to build it. The first 3 locks that were built here in Sault Ste. Marie, the State Lock, the Wetzel Lock, and the original Poe, were masonry construction. So they're built out of cut stone. This was from the construction of the original Poe locks. We've got an 1891 photo here, and it's just showing the ships delivering the stone. The stone was coming from Ohio, a quarry in Ohio, and the Brady Park area. If you've come to the Soo and had a picnic, I hope you enjoyed a Brady Park picnic. That area is where this stone yard was. It used to be where Fort Brady is, and they had docking spaces, so the boats could just tie up right here. They used that stiff leg crane to unload the rough blocks of limestone. And then in that, right out of the frame of that, there was a mill set up in Brady Park to cut the stone exactly to the size and dimensions that were needed for the project. This is a picture from the original Poe lock construction, and I just like, because it kind of blows my mind how complicated it must have been setting up the pattern for these blocks, because they have to interlock. They're going to have to be able to withstand thousands and thousands of pounds of water pressure pushing on them. And it had to just be a real engineering feat to know exactly what size and shape and what direction and orientation all these had to be placed in. You can also see those trestles again with the steam operated equipment on the rails that is placing each block exactly where it's supposed to go. Now, every lock since the original Poe in 1896 has been built with concrete. I'm not certain, but I think there's a very high probability that the Davis lock at the Soo Locks was the very first lock in the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers built with poured concrete. One thing that makes me kind of suspect that, I couldn't find anyone else's whose was older than ours built out of concrete. And also, our superintendent at the time was a man named Louis C. Sabin, and he wrote the book on concrete. I mean, he wrote a book on concrete, and it's about that thick. I will confess that I have not read it. I haven't even bought it. It does not sound like a page turner to me, and I am not a historian. But he was definitely somebody who was a leader in the field in this new innovative use of concrete, at least in terms of for navigation locks. And to make this more efficient, of course, we're going to be using so much concrete. They built a mixing plant right on the facility. So this one was, the contractor was Great Lakes Dock and Dredge, which you see right there on their mixing plant. And you saw earlier how the ships were delivering those raw materials. So you had your concrete right there where you needed it. To place that concrete, they use steel forms on these rail tracks. So these are reusable, movable forms. So they would pour these sections of what we call the monolith, which is the lock walls. They poured them in alternating sections. So they do one, skip a space, do the next one, skip a space. I asked an engineer why they do that, and she was explaining that it helps manage the curing of the concrete, and it also reduces what I think she called the form work. So when you go back to fill in those middle sections, you only need 2 forms. But also when concrete cures, it generates a lot of heat. So there's a way of managing that heat as well. Now, when it came to the MacArthur lock, they did not use the rails and they did not use steel forms. They used wooden forms, and they placed the concrete in flights, which in Ranger talk would be layers. So they do a flight or a layer, and then they let that cure a bit, and they do the next and the next and the next until they build it up to the height it needs to be. And this one also had an on-site cement plant. I'm not sure exactly where it was located, but this is one of my favorite pictures in our collection as well, because it's the last load of concrete. It was party time. And the park was closed to the public. So I always wonder if that lady is somebody who worked there, who just coming back from lunch or whatever, managed to get into the photo of the last load of concrete. I should mention too, another kind of cool fact, this is a different presentation. The MacArthur lock, that last load of concrete was placed about 5 days before they put a ship through the lock. For the current Poe lock, the one you can see now operating, our big lock, this was the second pour. I find this one kind of funny too, as being one of the several photographers at the Soo Locks. I don't know how many times you miss the first because somebody didn't think to call you or you didn't get there quick enough. So the photographer went ahead and got the second pour. And again, just like I pointed out on that excavation picture from the Davis lock, what we see here is black and white. The floor and walls here, other than this pile from the first pour of concrete, would have all been that bright red stone. Really colorful. And the Poe used basically the same kind of way of setting up their forms as the MacArthur did, using wooden forms every other section and doing it in flights. Now, the new lock at the Sioux that we're working on now, going to be poured concrete, just like all the other modern locks we have built. And this is a picture of their mixing plant, which is huge. I think they call it the batch plant. And last year they winterized it. So those gray buildings that you see over to the side, that is so that the materials can all be kept at the right heat and humidity all the time, so they're always ready. So there are piles of materials outside of those buildings, and then they can keep shifting those in so that they can constantly make concrete, theoretically 24 hours a day. They will always have materials that are ready at the right heat and temperature and humidity to turn into concrete. And we're still excavating on that new lock at the Sioux, but some of the construction has started. Not month before last, December, they did the first lift for 4 of the monolith structures. You can see here they're getting that concrete in place. Over here is how that concrete's being delivered, not hoppers like on the current Poe lock. But I'm going to have to read the name because, again, I'm a historian and I had to actually find somebody to tell me what this thing is called. So what we're looking at is you've got this truck and this whole little system over here, and there's where the concrete is going into the monolith that they are starting to build. It's called a surge crater reservoir, or hopper that goes to a telebelt. In park ranger language, I would call this a concrete pumper. And the coolest thing to me about this concrete pumper, and a big advantage over a 6 to 10 yard hopper that's going to go up and down, delivering concrete to where you need it, this little setup can handle up to 250 yards of concrete a minute. So this is going to be extremely fast and efficient compared to the ways that we have placed concrete in the past. So we're going to need to control the water flow. So we need a way to move water in and out of our chamber. Now, in the first lock, we don't have pictures because it was 1853 and nobody was here. But we have this picture from about 1865. And the way they moved water in and out of these chambers, I should point out, this is the lower chamber. Remember, that was a tandem lock with 2 chambers, each lifting about 9 to 10 feet. This is the lower chamber. Up here, we have the upper chamber. Now, from what it looks like in the photo, I can't be 100% sure because it wasn't there. They have lifted the sluices. So there were boards you could lift up in those gates that would allow water to flow through the gates. So if you were emptying a lock like this looks like they're doing, it's going to flow out until it hits that lower river level, and then it's going to stop because water stops when it seeks its own level. And if you were going to had a boat in this lock and you were going to raise it, you'd let water in from this upper chamber. It would come in and fill that lock to lift the boat until it could go into the second chamber. The problem with this system, it's kind of nice because it's very simple technology. It's just lifting and lowering sluices, basically, all manpower. But it creates a lot of turbulence in the lock. So if you remember when you were a little kid, how fun it was to just launch yourself from end to end of the bathtub until mom came in and yelled at you and you got in trouble because you'd knocked all the shampoo all over and everything had fallen into the tub or onto the floor. Basically, that was what was happening with the ships. Because of the water moving through the lock, it made it very hard to control the ships and it caused a lot of damage to the ships. So it was not the best system. Every lock we've built since then, all the federal built locks, have used valves and culverts, so like tunnels, to move the water, and they've all filled from the floor, which is a much easier, more gentle process than it coming in from one end or the other. It was last night that I discovered that the Wetzel used butterfly valves. So this is a picture of the Davis lock, 1913, showing their valves in place. This is how you control that flow of water through the lock. And then I found this picture from the Wetzel lock, showing them replacing and repairing a broken valve, which is again a butterfly valve. I was very happy to discover that last night. The way these work is it's got like a center pivot, and to let the water into the lock, you're just going to rotate it. So you're going to have your machinery, it's going to pull it upright, and the water is going to flow into your chamber. If you want to stop that water flow, you're going to close it. Water won't be going in anymore. So you can empty your lock. The Davis and Sabin and the Wetzel are the ones that were built with those kind of valves. And the MacArthur and the Poe use reverse tainter valves. The new lock is going to use reverse tainter valves as well. What I have here is a picture of the lower reverse tainter valve in the current Poe lock, the one built in 1968, and then a drawing of how it works. In this photo, this valve is in its upright position, so I was able to walk underneath it to get the photo. It has this hoisting arm that is going to lifts it into that position or lowers it down to to stop the flow of water through the lock. So this drawing is showing it in its down position, so stopping the flow of water. And this up here is showing how when it's raised, it's out of the way, allowing the water to flow into or out of the lock chamber. We have 4 of these valves on the MacArthur and Poe locks. There's 2 at the lower end on each side, north and south, and 2 at the upper end, north and south, on each lock. And I have also learned that the new lock is going to use the same kind of valves. And a kind of cool thing is it's being kind of reverse engineered so that the retainer valves for the Poe will be interchangeable with the retainer valves for the new lock. They're doing all kinds of things with the new lock to match the design and equipment and machinery of the Poe, and then they're doing on the where they can't do that, they're doing upgrades and changes to the Poe. So what we are hoping for is what we had with the Davis and Sabin, where we have 2 almost virtual twins with interchangeable parts. So we can always keep one of them working. You're going to need some gates too. We talked about how to move our water in and out of the chamber. We're going to need some gates. This is also another question we get all the time is why don't you just open the gates and let the boats just go through the canal? Well, because if you do that, you're going to have a rapids in your canal. This is a photo. This was not done on purpose. This was a photo from the Canadian lock from 1909. They had a freighter rammed their lower gates when the lock was at high pool. It knocked the gates off and caused what we call a free flow through their lock. You can't navigate that, which is why you have to have a navigation lock. You can't just let boats through by opening the gates. Now, the gates on the State and Wetzel lock were wood. I don't have good pictures of the State lock gates, so I will confess I cheated and I took a picture of the model we have in the visitor center. We just redid that exhibit if you visit at the visitor center. Pretty cool, that model. You can actually see a lot of how they constructed it and kind of the neat features of that lock. And the Wetzel gate was also, or Wetzel lock from 1881 was also wooden gates. And a kind of neat thing, I didn't get a chance to ask an engineer, I'm sure there's a reason. It seems that the gates are always assembled in place and assembled vertically. So not assembled somewhere nearby, laying out on the ground and then lifted into place. They're built as they go in place vertically. The Wetzel was the the Wetzel from 1881 was the last one that had wooden gates. The original Poe from 1896 was the first one to use steel gates. This is a picture showing most of those gates. One of my favorites. And it said that they used 2.5 tons of steel to make these gates. It doesn't seem like very much steel to me, but I don't know what that design was. And it was a much shallower lock than our modern locks. Here's a picture showing that assembly I was kind of trying to describe, where they build it in sections from the bottom up. It's one of my favorite pictures in the negative collection. And I want to just point out these workers here. Safety rules were very different back then. These guys are just hanging off it. They're probably 15, 20 feet off the ground. This guy up here who's just standing there with his hands in his pockets looking towards the photographer, he's probably close to 50 feet up. And that is a pretty sketchy looking scaffold to me. But I guess I'm pampered in our modern age where safety is a thing. And we did the same thing for the MacArthur and the Poe locks. The picture on the right is an assembled Poe gate. and the picture on the left is from the MacArthur lock. And over here, these are gates for the Davis and Sabin locks as part of the World War II effort and the MacArthur lock project. They decided that they wanted replacement gates for the Davis and Sabin lock. So a set was made and they assembled them there in the vertical, and then they were taken and they were stashed, stored, hidden in the river below the locks. If you follow our Facebook page, you probably saw some pretty cool photos last summer, because now that the Davis and Sabin locks no longer exist, we have no strategic need to keep those gates in the river. So it was a huge project with our river section, and our dive team went out and recovered those. Speaking of the gates, you're going to have to move the gates. You're going to need some machinery to move those gates. Now here on the state lock, this picture from 1865 or so, we've seen this picture before. I just want to talk to you. I've talked about the sluices are lifted manually. These gates are opened manually. Now the gates won't move until the water level is level. That's the same for the locks now. If there is even like a foot ahead, a difference in water level of about a foot, it is physically impossible to open them because the water pressure will hold them shut. So for this lock, it's going to have to be in the lower position. And these gentlemen who are out here, I presume, to deal with those sluices, are going to have to move over here. And maybe this guy's going to help, who knows. And they're going to turn this capstan, which is attached to this great big huge beam. And that's going to pull that beam back, and it's going to pull those gates into the wall recesses so boats can get in and out of the lock. So this one is entirely powered by people, gravity and manpower, for the original lock built here, the state lock in 1855. One kind of cool thing, the original Poe from 1896, that was the first lock here that was powered by hydroelectric power. So in this picture from 1894 on the left, you can see those turbines that were installed to bring that water in and generate electricity to operate all the machinery. I went ahead and threw in this picture of the administration building, and I left that label in because I wanted you to notice that it says Powerhouse. With what we call the administration building now, arguably the most recognizable building on our facility, a beautiful building, it was called the Powerhouse because its main function, other than office spaces, was generating the power to operate the facility. Now, for the Davis and Sabin locks, it's all electrically powered, but they used cables to move those gates. And unfortunately, I could not get a good picture of those cables on the gates, and now I'll never get one. Hopefully, I'll find one in my collections. It's a challenge when you've taken tens of thousands of pictures over 15 years to actually find one specific one. But this is showing the machinery, and those were operated with cables. So there was a cable system. It ran on a loop, and depending which direction you ran your machinery, it would pull those gates into the open position, or it would pull them into the closed position. So that was kind of a unique feature of the Davis and the Sabin. The Poe, managed to find this picture by a fluke this morning, is operated by hydraulic cylinders. So up here, you can see that hydraulic cylinder that's attached to the gate, and basically it's a hydraulic cylinder. It uses hydraulics to pull and push that gate into its open or closed position. I didn't have pictures of the MacArthur lock, but it also has a unique system for moving its gates. It uses mechanical gears. Another thing I'll point out, which is why I think the 2.5 tons of steel seems kind of not enough for those original Poe lock gates. These two gates right here, each leaf, we call it a leaf, each half of this gate weighs 250 tons. Now, I mean, maybe that's possible because these gates are about 60 feet tall and they're much wider than the ones from that original Poe lock, but they're substantial. This is one of my last things. Our construction hasn't really started in earnest on that new lock at the Soo. I'm going to try to get this video going. It does not have sound, but I'm going to try to narrate it. And I also want to, and hopefully Scott can drop a link into the chat, because I really want to encourage you, because it seems like it goes very fast, except for when it seems like it goes very slow. And it can be actually very beneficial to watch this on your own computer, where you can slow it down and pause it. I did a lot of that last night when I was reviewing it to get ready for today. And I'm going to try to get it started, and I will try to talk us through what you're going to see happening. It's going to review a lot of what we talked about. So here you see those coffer cells being built at the upper and lower ends. Then they're going to install these stability anchors to make sure that monolith does not move and the water comes out, and they start working in there. Then they're going to start removing this backfill around the Sabin lock because there's some real concern that once that water comes out, those walls could collapse. Now they've taken the water out of the lock and they're getting rid of the old temporary coffer dam. They're going to start the demolition on the Sabin and the floor of the Davis. Now, as you can guess from the pictures you saw earlier, it wasn't this cool, smooth process like dominoes we're seeing here, but it is essentially what has to happen. They're going to remove all of the Sabin lock structure. They're going to use the fill from the Sabin to fill in the Davis. They're going to put in a new pump well and pumping system over here. That's what you see dropping into place. That's how we're going to dewater the new lock. They're going to build the pump well, and then there's going to be a building on top of that to maintain those pumps. They're going to start putting in the sills, which is like what the gates rest against, and the buildings, and start building that monolith, the wide parts of it where most of the machinery is going to be and where it has the most stress on it. They're going to put in those gates, the operating gates, and one of the ship arresters at the lower end. The upper end, you'll see they're starting to build that the wide structure where the machinery is going to be, and the sills for the upper gates, and the buildings are coming in. And they're going to start building just the regular chamber monoliths. So those are kind of the narrow sections, which will be about 50 feet wide at the base. They're going to finish the final things here. They're going to have to start doing the floor. So they're putting in the floor, and where the laterals are to connect to the culverts that are built into this monolith to feed the water into the lock chamber. They're going to get rid of the temporary dams that we no longer need, those coffer dams we built. They're going to backfill around so we have all level ground and we have pressure both sides of that lock wall from the soil and the water, and remove those coffer dams you see going out so that we can get ready to go into business. They're going to put in that hands-free mooring. That's a new feature for that new lock, and putting in those ship arresters to protect those gates from any ship coming in. And we're going to get ready to lock that first boat in 2030. Again, I encourage you to take a look at that on YouTube. It's on our YouTube page, and hopefully Scott will get that link dropped into the chat, and you can watch it at your own pace. I'm afraid I was a little lazy, and I decided to do that talk through instead of a conclusion summing up all the main points. Felt like a lot of information, and it's a big job. It's a big job that's happening right now. And are you up for it? If you are, the contractor is hiring, and any jobs we have within the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, you're going to find on usajobs.gov. And I hope you enjoyed the presentation. I'll turn it back over to Scott.
Awesome, Michelle. Thank you. I really like that animation. That really
It's very cool. But, I had to watch it like 9 or 10 times to be able to process all of it. So I really do encourage people to take a look.
Yeah, yep. And I did drop that link in the chat there.
Thank you.
Yep, a couple of things before we get to any questions people might have. Just a quick status thing on both of our visitor centers. For the Lake Superior Maritime Visitor Center where I work, we are currently in our winter hours, which means we're open Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, 10 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. But those hours will be expanded starting March 24th when the shipping season gets going. and we'll be actually open more days of the week. I'm not sure what our schedule is going to be, but we'll be open more. But for in the meantime, if you come and visit us while we're closed, we have cell phone tour stops outside with signage, and we also have a virtual online tour of the visitor center on our website. For the Sioux Locks Visitor Center, where Michelle is at, or works rather, they're closed until May 1st. But despite that, the park is open daily, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. And then again, a reminder for the next presentation, my good friend Dan will be joining us, the Cadet to Mate, a Young Mariner's Career presentation, where we will be talking about his journey to where he's at now. He is already has this past season he actually had some duties as a first mate kind of replacement, so he's already moved up the ladder really quickly, partially due to the fact that they're need of workers in the shipping industry. But please do join us for that one. I'll be moderating that on Thursday, March 6th at the same time. And if you miss it, like all the other programs, we will be recording it. So I'll be looking forward to that. Any questions anyone's got after that thorough presentation that Michelle gave us?
I'm sorry if it was exhausting.
No, I followed along, at least I followed along very closely. I loved how you were using all the different locks as examples with how it's changed or how it's similar and how they do it. I did see a hand up from one of the folks here, I believe, Marilyn. Go ahead and ask your question, Marilyn, since it looks like you have your mic on.
I'm Canadian, and I came in a little bit late to the presentation. What year was the canoe lock built at Sault Ste. Marie, Canada?
That one was built in 1798. And I did kind of gloss over that because I already went over time. So I had to be I had to try to keep a very tight focus, even if it didn't seem like it, because I also completely ignored the reality of the Canadian lock over here, too. Both the one that opened in 1895 and the rebuilt one.
Right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat, which gives me a good opportunity to ask you, Michelle, with the annual first ship stuff that happens every year. If you want to go ahead and talk about what goes on when the first ship comes through the Soo.
Sure.
Coming
Our
up next month.
Visitor Center Association last year, as part of a membership drive, which was really successful. That association, by the way, helps pay for this platform for us to use, and it helps provide gap funding and helps pay for projects that are hard for the Army Corps of Engineers to pay for. So supporting them, it actually helps support our visitor centers. In Duluth, they have the Lake Superior Marine Museum Association, same kind of setup. But I'm the one talking now, so I'm going to talk about my association. Yes. And last year, as a membership drive, they had a special members-only reception at this beautiful place we have in town. It's a renovated church with snacks and sandwiches and food, and we have professionals from the industry available for question and answer, meet and mingle. It was a lot of fun. We're going to repeat that again this year. You just have to be a member. If you're a member, it's free to attend. We have a website. The Visitor Center Association has a website. I think it's slvca.org or something like that. If you search it, I think you'll find it. Or if you find the association page on Facebook, it links right to their website if you want to join. And another incentive for membership that they came up with last year, every year on March 25th at midnight, or hopefully before, because I'm old and I don't like to stay up till midnight anymore. The day before the locks open at midnight, so March 24th. In Sault Ste. Marie, it's a tradition. A delegation goes out to greet the first ship. They bring gifts and plaques, and there's a little speech and a little bit of brouhaha. Visitor Center Association gives every crew member a baseball cap that documents that they were the first ship of the season. And apparently people really want those hats. I've talked to people who've told me how many of those hats they have received because they're so pleased. Last year we had the Joseph L. Block show up a full day early to make sure that they got those hats. And as one of the incentives, we draw a name from the members. So anyone who is a current active member submits their name to our membership coordinator, and your name goes into a drawing. And if you win, you get to represent the Visitor Center Association and participate in that first ship greeting, meet the captain, get your picture with them, time permitting. Some years you get invited on the ship, so you actually get to go into the pilot house, and it's really a fun experience. I've done it probably about 14 times now, and I still get excited and geeked up about being able to do it. Really bummed I had to miss it last year. I was doing an educational program for some elementary schoolers in Marquette. Missed all the fun. But hopefully this year, scheduling will work out better and I'll get to go too. But if you're interested in a chance at getting to greet that first ship, you also win overnight accommodations. So there's an Airbnb that the reception is held in. It gets professionally cleaned after the reception event, and then it's turned over to the winner of the draw, and they have their accommodations for the night. And there's some gift baskets that they have got some donations for that are being assembled too. So that drawing, I think, is scheduled for March 1st, and I think people can join and add their names for that drawing up until, I think it was February 24th. Not sure, follow our website, or not the website, but the Facebook page for the Visitor Center Association, Sioux Locks Visitor Center Association, and they will have the current information and deadlines on their website probably sometime next week. They're just getting their newsletter out, and they want to get that to the current members before they open it to the public. And then, as if that was not enough, if you don't want to be a member, you are welcome to come. We have an open house reception on March 25th. So the first full day of navigation, usually there's plenty of traffic that day. The visitor center is open. We have coffee and cookies the only day that we let the public have food in the visitor center. And that's a really fun, kind of relaxed place to chill and meet with other boat nerds. The event's been growing and growing over the last few years, which has been fun and exciting to see. And of course, there is the staying up till midnight to watch that first boat. We have special hours in the park. Normally in March, parks close at 6, but we reopen it usually around 11:30 p.m. And then it'll stay open until about 1:30 a.m. so people can come and stand in the observation platform and greet that first ship when it arrives from the platform. Thanks, Scott, for giving me that softball.
Yeah, yep. So I can also personally attest, I lucked out this last year and didn't have to stay up till midnight when I came and visited for it. So I'll have to come back for a midnight one to get the full staying up till midnight experience.
I have I'm secretly, maybe not secretly since I'm about to say it, I'm hoping that we do an early one again this year. Last year the opening got moved up 3 days. Shipping industry was requesting it. The water was open. We were able to accommodate it with our winter work schedule. So we actually opened the lock at 6 p.m. March 22nd. That's how I ended up not being able to greet the first ship, because I was like, okay, it's going to be tight, but I'm doing this school program in Marquette. And if I leave by noon, I could be back to the Sioux by about 3 or 4. And the reception isn't going to be till like 7 p.m. Plenty of time. And then, of course, they changed it to 6 p.m. Everything moved forward, and I missed greeting the first ship. Almost missed the start of the reception. But those decisions come at pay grades way higher than mine and Scott's, and we just do our best to react to them. But honestly, 6 p.m. opening, so much more civilized.
Yeah.
And I don't like night photography, so the daytime, the lighting was gorgeous. Please do that again.
Yeah. And I do encourage people to do the raffle, because I think last year, only 30 people or something?
There were not a whole lot.
Yeah, so your chances of winning are pretty high, but it's a great event. The church that they kind of use, or the old historic church building they use for the get together is really cool. And I live in Duluth, 7 to 8 hours away, and it was really fun weekend to go out there. I don't know if I'll be able to this year, but we'll see. I encourage people who haven't done it before, do it. It's worth the trip, even if it's wintry still.
It's really fun, and it's been growing. We'll have a couple hundred people up in the platform.
Hmm.
This year, or they did it last year too, but this year the association is also doing another special first ship hat. So it's a knit beanie toque type hat, and really nice. Those were super
Awesome.
popular last year. They're hoping they'll be popular again.
All right, cool. Well, hopefully we'll try to advertise, and maybe the Marine Museum Association that represents us in Duluth will help you guys advertise for that happening, since we don't have anything quite that extravagant for the first ship coming through.
Well, it's a little less predictable on your end.
Yeah, yep. There's a less public first salty thing that happens on board, the first salty that comes in, but we don't do nearly as much. So that's a cool event. But any other questions that people might have before we end things for this afternoon? Doesn't
I
look
have
like.
either thoroughly confused everyone or just answered all their questions, it looks like.
Yep. All right. With that, thank you guys for joining us today. Um, hope to see some of you maybe this year if you're nearby in the region or not, or online for our next presentation in March. Um, and Once again, thanks again, Michelle, for the presentation, and
And I'm going to
hopefully
go on a limb
everything.
here, and I'm just going to say, for me and Scott, if you see us in our visitor centers, feel free to tell us hello and that you enjoyed the virtual visitor center. For
Yes,
me
please do
personally,
that.
I have children just a little bit younger than Scott, and I love to tell them that I'm internet famous because they get so angry. They just get so angry when I was like, "Oh, people came in. They knew me from the internet. I'm an influencer." And my daughter's just like, "Not cool."
Yeah, I no, I it also reminds me too sometimes that how much these videos reach, how far, how many people they reach. But
And thank you all
yep.
of you for coming today,
Hmm.
especially with all the changes we had.
Hmm.